All right. We are now live. We are now live and on the air. A Bibi Fahoutier, Spears is flying. You are live with the Mossi Warrior Clan and my distinguished panel. Today we're going to be honoring our great ancestor, Dr. Amos Wilson. And this is a very important show, family, because when we talk about our greats, sometimes we leave out some of the people that had a monumental and very important role in the Black nationalist and Pan-African movement. So let me get rid of this background noise. Okay, there we go. All right, so I wanted to do this show, but I knew I couldn't do this show alone. So to do this show, I went and got the three people that I know studied Dr. Amos Wilson's work in detail. So today I have with me Dr. Maat from Mel Trek. I have Brother DJ from the Black Power Awards and Ulu, Us Lifting Us, and Asar Imhotep from Mandu Ndela and the Amara Squad. How y'all doing today?
Peace and power, brother Black Panther. How are you?
I'm excellent, because I'm doing the show that I wanted to do, so I'm good.
I know. I'm excited to be here, on the platform. I'm glad that you invited me to come out and speak, and you got brother DJ on the platform and brother Asar. And these are brothers that I hold nearest and dearest to my heart. So I just want to salute all the brothers on the panel. You already know, Brother Black Panther, that I'm a huge fan of Dr. Amos Wilson. I've been studying him, I'm not going to say for years, but I've just, recently, started really studying him in depth. And I'm looking forward to this show because, as you and I discussed offline, Dr. Amos Wilson never gets his just due. If you put up a clip of Dr. Amos Wilson on Facebook or one of his quotes, you may get about 10 likes. But if you put up like Dr. Ben or Dr. Clark, a lot of people know Dr. Ben and know Dr. Clark. And in my opinion, Dr. Amos Wilson, he was one of the greatest minds, in the 20th century, in my opinion. He was my, not only does he tell you what happened, but he tells you why. So, I was able to actually psychoanalyze myself and also my family into, a lot of his lectures. It's like, oh, okay, that's why we do this. He really helps you understand the psychology of Black people. So why we behave the way we behave, why we have, the characteristics that you do. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic. I don't want to start rambling on about him because I could go in, but I'm going to
go in today. We're going to go in today. Brother DJ from Us Lifting Us Black Power Awards, the brother that introduced me to Amos Wilson. So I had to have him on this panel. What's going on, brother?
Peace and Black Power, Brother Panther, Brother Asar, Dr. Maat. It's a pleasure to be on with all three of you Africans. I may have introduced you to Baba Amos, but I felt or feel like you would have found out about him anyway. All of the serious Africans that I know and that I talk to on a regular basis at some point have come across the information that Baba Amos brought us, many years ago. And so, again, it's a pleasure to be on with you and the family and looking forward to the discussion.
All right. And last and definitely not least, our brother Asar Imhotep, out in his secret location, wherever he is. Brother Asar, share your thoughts with us about this great ancestor and what you're going to be bringing to us today.
Peace and blessings to you, Brother Black Panther, and peace to Dr. Oya, Brother DJ. Nice to finally meet you. I mean, it's not enough that could be said about Dr. Amos Wilson, and I'm upset that I was alive during, much of his later heyday, and I was totally unaware of his existence until many years after he died. And that's kind of the downfall of one existing in the pre-internet era and living in the South. you know, with him primarily being headquartered in New York. When I first came across his work, I felt like I've been deprived all my life. It's just like, you know, when Neo realized, you know, what he was able to do in the Matrix 1 film, you know, after realizing that he was in the Matrix and that, you know, none of this was real, that he can determine more of his own fate. Like, I had that moment when I came across, you know, Dr. Amos Wilson's work. And I'm pretty sure we'll get into more details on how powerful his work is. So I appreciate, you know, this type of discussion and you taking this time in your platform to lift up his name. And hopefully, you know, we can introduce him and his works and ideas, you know, to a new generation, you know, of young Africans who are looking for some serious direction, you know, in their lives and trying to find their place in this movement.
Absolutely. You know, I know we had this discussion before, but well, before I say that, let me first say, Iba said Egungun Amos Wilson, honoring him in our tradition of Ifa. So I would say it 3 times. Iba say Egungun Amos Wilson. Iba say Egungun Amos Wilson. Iba say Egungun Amos Wilson. Ashe, Ashe, Asheo. And, you know, that we have to honor our memory of our ancestors. That is our tradition. No matter what spiritual system you study in Africa, you have that element of honoring the ancestors. And actually, if you were to ever get Brother Asar's book, Nasut Biti, he goes in detail about the importance of honoring our ancestors and how important they are in our culture. So, going on, I picked up this book a long time ago, as Brother DJ probably remembers, Falsification of African Consciousness.
Yeah.
So I picked it up, and the first book, I don't know what happened to it. I couldn't find it. I lost it. I don't know where it went. So I ordered it twice. So the second one came in the mail. I was still living in Riverdale at the time. But, you know, as serious Africans, we get a lot of books. And sometimes some books that we should be reading get buried at the bottom of the pile. So I finally got around to reading and completing this book. And just the sheer genius of the way he breaks things down from a psychological standpoint, it really makes you take a look at society from a different way. And the way he Africanizes information, it really made me rethink some things as far as how we teach our people. Because when people come to us for a book list or things we should read, you know, we go with the classic master teachers, you know, Dr. Ben, John Henry Clark, Sheikh Anta Diop, you know, Asa Hilliard and others. But I kind of start thinking maybe we're doing this the wrong way, because those are great books to have, and they show you great facts about our history, whether it be Kemet or any other part of Africa. But Amos Wilson shows you the why. Why are you studying this? And if we start to backtrack and show them the why first, then maybe consciousness will catch on more with our youth, because youth always want to know why. I know I did as a kid. Your mama tell you, go rake them leaves, take out the trash. First thing I about, Mom, why I gotta do it? You know, so if we show the youth the why first, they will be more inclined to digest the what. Because John Henry Clark, Theophile Banga, Sheikh Anta Diop, they're gonna give you the what. They're gonna give you either the linguistics, the history, the anything you want to know on the particular subject in which they're teaching upon. But Amos Wilson is going to give you the why. And if you look at this, the second part of the title, it says Eurocentric history, the psychiatry, and the politics of white supremacy. So you meet a lot of people in the diaspora that are anti-politics. What they should be saying is we're anti a specific type of politics, maybe government politics they don't want to deal with. Okay, that's fine. But Amos shows us everything that we are trying to gain, everything we are working for has a political agenda to it. Mm-hmm. And I never thought about it like that until I got into his work. So, Dr. Maat, what are your thoughts on some of his works, and share some of the works that you reviewed by him, and let's just start there.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Brother Ben, because you and I spoke about that offline, like how, you know, Dr. Amos Wilson gives you the why. For example, I come across brothers and sisters often, you know, even family members who didn't understand why I wanted to produce Meltrek. You know, they were like, it's just a cartoon, you know, it's just a cartoon series, you know, and why do you want to focus on history? Like you said, the why, and Dr. Amos Wilson answers that in a lot of his books. He's like, you know, look, history shapes your worldview, because a lot of people don't understand why we want to study history. They're like, you know, a lot of people believe that history is a thing of the past. So it's like, why do you want to go back and revisit that? But Dr. Amos Wilson, in a lot of his various works, and I've been reading, you know, Blueprint for Black Power. I mean, the book is kind of thick, so I've been taking my time. I'm trying to get through that book.
Take your time, Doc.
Take my time, so I kind of pick out.
Pages ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, look, so I try to pick out the chapters that I'm interested in, you know, and I'll read those. Instead of trying to read it from like beginning to end, I just kind of been picking through some of the chapters. And in one chapter, he breaks down consciousness. He breaks down consciousness, because a lot of us walk around and say we're conscious. And when you define consciousness, you know, a lot of people define it as simply just being aware of something. But oh my goodness, he has an entire chapter dedicated to what is consciousness. And in that chapter, he says that, okay, you know, being conscious is more than just being aware. You know, once you are aware, now you have to do. So his definition of consciousness, in my opinion, it gives some sort of accountability. So it's like, okay, once I am aware of these things, then what should I do? You know, so I love his breakdown of consciousness in Blueprint for Black Power. I also have his book. It's called, I think it's called The Development of the Psychology of the Black Child, because he was saying in that work, in order to properly educate our children, we have to understand their psychology and how it develops. So again, we're going back to why. Why is this stuff important? So anyway, in that book, he's talking about the psychology of the Black child, right? And I think that anybody that is interested in education, or, you know, someone that may have like an African-centered school, I highly recommend reading The Development of the Psychology of the Black Child. I also have his book, Awakening the Genius of the Black Child. I also have his book, oh my goodness, Understanding, I want to say it's called Understanding Black Male on Male Violence, or Black Male, Adolescent Black Male Violence. Yeah, I haven't gotten into that book yet, but I am.
Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in the Service of White Domination.
Yes, I have that book. I think it's a red and black book, I believe, but I think the cover is red and black, but I have that. I haven't cracked it yet. But you already know, Brother Ben and Brother Dwayne and Brother Asar, that I'm a huge proponent of African-centered education. And so it was important to me to get these works to really study how should we educate our children. And Dr. Amos Wilson made it clear that if we want to transform our communities, that we had to recapture and transform the minds of the children in that community. And he also made me, you know, just become more aware that as parents, that we need to be more engaged or in more control of the conditioning process of our babies. And so that's why I really got into African-centered education. Dr. Amos Wilson helped me to understand the importance of African-centered education and what it is, because initially I didn't understand what African-centered education was. I thought that prior to reading his work, if someone were to say, oh, you know, I have an African-centered school, in my opinion, I would be thinking that it's just a school that focuses more on, I guess, the, you know, African culture and African history versus the public school system. But in learning in learning about African-centered education, and through Dr. Amos Wilson, I'm learning that African-centered education is much more than that. It's much more than teaching your children or teaching our children the culture and history of our people. It's really teaching them to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and self-determined. And so it's much, you know, African-centered education, he says this in a lot of his lectures, it's much more than just rituals and culture and dance and learning history. You know, he said, you know, you're actually, you know, with African-centered education, you're worried about the survival and maintenance of the African world, you know, as a whole. And so Dr. Amos Wilson has really helped me understand the purpose of African-centered education, the function, and even what a proper curriculum is. I mean, this brother, he actually recommended in one of his works, Nation Building by Brother Kwame Nkoto. And I had the book. I went to my university store and at Morgan, and I was able to grab the book, and I read the book. It's a very good book. And in that book, he offers a African-centered curriculum, you know, and you know, then he does a comparison, you know, between the Eurocentric curriculum and an African-centered curriculum. But anyway, through Dr. Amos Wilson, I've learned how to properly educate our babies, you know, and a lot of people say, well, you know, Dr. Maat, just send them to school. No. We have to understand what the school is and how it's supposed to function, you know, and I learned through Dr. Amos Wilson that school is much more than just disseminating information and providing, you know, skills to the children. You know, school is, you know, when you go into school, not only are you learning, you know, math and science, but he helped me to understand that you're being enculturated, you know, and he taught me that, you know, when you go to a school, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but he was telling me that with schools, you have to check the curriculum. What is the curriculum objectives? And then what is the philosophical foundation of the curriculum? So, you know, we think that when we're just sending our children to school, that we're sending them just to, no, you got to really understand the purpose and function of a school, you know. And then another thing before I pass the mic, Dr. Amos Wilson also helped me to understand that, and this is the dilemma that I'm going through right now in my household. He was saying that, you know, that the culture and ideology of the household has to be aligned with that of the community and also the school. And he was saying that when you have a misalignment, that causes confusion in the children. And I'm seeing that now, you know, with my 16-year-old who will be 17 in March, and even my 18-year-old Harvey, you know, it's like I'm home and I'm trying to inculcate them with certain values and, you know, a certain mindset. But then when they leave home, they had to go out into a community that's not reflective of what I'm teaching them at home, you know, or because at that point when they were coming up, I didn't understand, you know, I didn't know anything about African-centered education years ago when they were matriculating through school. But both of them, Harvey graduated from a public school system, and Isaiah is now at a private school. But even when they go to school, you know, he was saying that, you know, what I'm teaching them at home is not what he's learning at school. So Amos Wilson allowed me to understand the importance of community and even the school, and how everything has to be culturally aligned and ideologically aligned, you know, to develop that child. I don't know if I'm articulating myself the best way. You
are.
Like it can't be a misalignment. Right. And when there's a misalignment, then that's when there's some confusion, or it causes confusion within the child. So he helped me to understand that school, you know, is a very, very powerful entity in developing our children. And as African people, we have to be in control of their schooling. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic.
Very beautifully said. To reinforce one point you made about conscious, you know, we use that as just, you know, you're just aware of something. But the way Amos Wilson defined it, he defined it as active intelligence.
Yes, he did.
And he was saying that once you become conscious, you operate a certain way. You operate differently. And the key word is operate, meaning you have to do something about it. You can no longer just sit back and watch your people do the things that are self-destructive. You get involved. You create institutions. You create businesses. And that operation is something that's missing from the conscious community today. So he put pressure on you when you become conscious. And a lot of us, well, you know, some of us today, we can't live up to that conscious title from our great ancestor just yet, because we got to get off the bench and get involved. Brother DJ.
Yes, sir.
Share your thoughts, brother.
You know, I can sit here and listen all day because I'm first and foremost a student. And so I'm enjoying hearing the commentary from our dear sister, Dr. Maat, as she breaks down what Baba Amos means to her, the impact that he's had on her personal life and the life of her family. You know, I go back in my study of Amos Wilson almost a decade now, primarily from, you know, the elders that I've had the pleasure to be connected with, you know, folks like Dr. Marimba Ani, Baba Mwalimu Baruti, Baba Kobe Kambon, Dr. Kobe Kambon, and others who, Baba Amafika Gayuka, all of those elders are serious students of not only Baba Amos, but also, you know, that genetic line that he comes from, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, on up to the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So we have a clear strand, so to speak, of clear thinking, of Black nationalist, African nationalist thinking that we can all, you know, appreciate. You know what I mean? And so his contemporaries, folks like the Queen Mother, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Bobby Wright. I mean, Baba Amos Wilson comes in the lines of all of those greats, you know. And so as a student of his, I appreciate the clear analysis that he brought. You know, Dr. Maat mentioned something that I hear people oftentimes repeat, that Dr. Amos Wilson represented one of the most clearest minds that our race has ever produced. You know, his level of analysis, the depth as well as breadth of analysis, we can have this conversation all week and not even scratch the surface of what Baba Amos brought. You know what I mean? Because when you look at all of the work that he's done in his books, each book is an institution in and of itself. You know what I mean? So just like Dr. Maat said, I don't really see how you can run an African-centered school without having studied Dr. Amos Wilson and his analysis of Black children and how Black children learn and how they develop educationally and as well as socially. You see, so his level of analysis politically, which for me culminated in the Blueprint for Black Power, is something that is the main reason, Brother Ben, why I reached out to you to get you to really study his work. Because when people really understand Dr. Amos Wilson, their conversations tend to be different. You know, their level of analysis tends to be different, where we don't just get caught up in the dates of things that we've done in the past, but we can also connect those things to where we are today, but what more importantly, what we must do to position ourselves for power in the future. And so a part of my work in our community is to really institutionalize or build institutions around works like the Blueprint for Black Power, like, you know, Iwa, a warrior's character, like Urugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior, to really build institutions around these particular works so that our children who may not read the books, but they get exposed to the information in their everyday life, how they circumnavigate this society. So if they never get to the point of picking up the book is reflective of their parents and their total community. So what Dr. Maat said about the breakdown or the disconnect between how we tend to raise, rear, and socialize our children and what they face in the outside community is extremely important. And Baba Amos, again, he explains why that happens. he explains why that happens. And so when there's this cultural disconnect between how we're raising and rearing our children and what they face in the broader society, his analysis says that that leads to maladaptive behavior. You see, because a human being is not created to just straddle the fence. You see, you're either on the left or you're on the right of a particular thing. And because we control so little power in this society, our children come into this world, and by the time they get to 12, 13 years old, they begin to realize that the community has not created social system institutions that can move them to be a productive man or woman in their community. So it's like, you're raising me to be African centered, but I got to go to work for the white man. How do I rationalize the two? Well, you're not supposed to rationalize the two. They are diametrically opposed to each other. So when we fail to build the institutions to move our children forward, then what we're doing is committing cultural suicide.
That's right.
You see, because the children are the ones that have to move the culture to the next level of thought. And so if they lack the ability to do the things that are consistent with being a responsible African man and African woman, it's no wonder we see the issues that we see in our community.
Teach, Brother Dwayne.
And that's why I had to have Brother DJ a part of this conversation, because it's crazy, because Amos Wilson was so influential that I started to see Amos Wilson in all of the people that I learned from. So when I started reading his work, I started seeing, it was almost like DJ was talking to me in the pages. It was almost like Asar is talking.
I appreciate it.
It's like Malamu Barudi is talking. It's like Dr. Maat is talking. And then I started to notice how much of an influence Amos Wilson had on the serious people in our community. And I said, this elder has to be recognized. He has to be honored. He has to be spoke about more often than just Black History Month, than just a reference. Asar says Africa has to be more than just a reference. So I feel the same way about Amos Wilson. It can't be just we talk about him sometimes. His book should be pushed in our community. So Brother Asar, share with us your thoughts.
Peace. Yeah. The full quote is, we need to stop using Africa simply as a reference, but as a resource, as a location to find solutions to problems. A lot of us reference Africa. The ancient Egyptians did this. Mali is over here at this time and this date, and they did that. Instead of asking the fundamental questions of life in terms of what were the dynamic relationships involved and needed, for example, in order for the ancient Egyptians to build pyramids. Given that you had to have over 10 to 20,000 people working on the structure, how do you organize something that large? What kind of relationship must the people have with each other in order to build successfully like that at a time, especially when there's no such thing as money? These are the fundamental questions that an Amos Wilson will have you asking, these more deeper questions, in terms of psychology and relationships. And so, that's one of the key things that you learn from his works. You'll see these words pop up every now and then. I mean, almost every page. Relationship, power relationships, between groups, the psychology, even to the fundamental basis of family and how that expands into, the larger society and government and things of that nature, starting from that particular nucleus. And so in terms of his importance, I joke with folks, but in many respects, I'm serious in terms of I judge my elders on how quickly they introduce me or not to Amos Wilson. I felt like if I met them and they didn't mention Amos Wilson, then I got cheated and I got to look at you differently, because he's just that important, in terms of this kind of work we're doing. And he's so important that you know, matter of fact, looking at his work, Maulana Karenga's earlier work, and there's an individual here. He's relatively new. A lot of people haven't heard of him. But if you read his works, it's very powerful along the same lines. And this is Brother Ezra Aharon. And for example, I'm holding one of his books called Sovereign Evolution, Manifest Destiny from Civil Rights to Sovereign Rights. And he has a series of texts along these lines. You know, reading all of these different things in conjunction over the years in context, it forced me to reevaluate and examine what exactly is missing. And when I'm reading all the works of the greats, but it's only, in my opinion, three individuals who really amplify the importance of this particular element to the success of our struggle. And that is Sheikh Anta Diop, or Sheikh Anta Diop, Maulana Karenga, and Dr. Amos Wilson. And it's on the importance of culture to the cohesion and the development of power. And Diop is really kind of the first on that with his small contribution called Black Africa, a cultural and a cultural economic basis for a federated state. Now, for me, who studies linguistics and African history and things of that nature, it was Dr. Diop's works are very important along those lines. But it's not until I read this tiny little work, one of his last contributions, you know, to us, that I understood more plainly his particular mission and why he took the approach that he did in terms of the scientific analysis of history. And that is, he understood that the Africans, one, were not united because they saw themselves as different people. So what Sheikh Anta Diop focused on was demonstrating the non-accidental common historical heritage and cultural and linguistic heritage of Africans across the continent. And the reason why he did this is so that they have a scientific basis to unite and understand themselves as a people who come from a common origin, and that your language just sounds a little different, but if you slow it down, you'll understand that we're speaking the same language. And so with that underlying mission, then there's this whole idea of a United States of Africa. And so he understood that you cannot have a United States of Africa until you have some cultural unity. They have to see each other, you know, as a people and have a collective consciousness, which Africa does not have. It has its individual ethnic group population consciousness, but they have yet to develop an African consciousness. We take for granted here in the United States that there's a such thing as an African consciousness. That's really our ideas, because we see Africa as a unit, whereas a lot of the people on the ground do not see it as such. So Sheikh Anta Diop's work underscored the importance of the development of culture for the stability of Africa, you know, as a whole. So then we move forward to the works of Maulana Karenga and his underscoring of the importance of culture. Now with Maulana Karenga, his fundamental idea was, we're just going to take, you know, the best of African culture and then try to use it the best that we can here in the United States. It's good, but this is where Amos Wilson comes in. Now, Amos Wilson, understanding the importance of culture, when you read Blueprint for Black Power, this super book here, the third chapter, after defining what is power, The third chapter starts off with the title, The Social and Cultural Origins of Power. The cultural origins of power, meaning that there is no power without culture. Culture is the basis, you know, of it. But unlike Maulana Karenga, where he's just simply grabbing like the idea of Kwanzaa and, you know, the Kiswahili, you know, languages and stuff like this, just taking from everywhere, you know, the Yoruba tradition in terms of the Odu Ifa and having that as an ethical basis, or Maat, la. Nothing wrong with that in of itself. Amos Wilson understands that in order for it to be successful, it has to be homegrown. And that while we can use what we can from Africa, there's nothing wrong with starting our own, inventing our own, inventing from scratch. And this is what I take from his works, that it's not simply that you just say Kofa and go back and fetch it as if it can fit in the environment, in the reality that you live in currently. There has to be some adaptation and there has to be some originality. And so the Yoruba, for example, were not always the Yoruba, and there was no such thing as Yoruba culture. They had to invent it. The ancient Egyptian culture was not always the ancient Egyptian culture. Something happened and they developed as a people and they developed the culture. And so this is what we need here, something that it is homegrown, but African centered, but puts us on equal footing with any other African group, you know, on the continent. So we don't come, you know, to the table as lost stepchildren, but, you know, as viable entities unto ourselves. And so he changes the conversation and changes the dynamics and the questions that we ask, you know, regarding, you know, how we should move forward and what are the fundamental ingredients for our success. And, you know, one of the things that gets left out, as I said earlier, for the most part, is cultural development, because culture ultimately is a system of relationships, rules, and things of that nature, and procedures that help a people solve their fundamental problems of life. And if your culture does not solve your problems, then you need to change the dynamics of your culture. One of the things I love, and I'll end with this, is that, you know, he was saying in his lectures that culture is not sacred. Like, you can hold on to culture at, you know, at the detriment of your people. You know, you invent culture to serve your needs. Mm-hmm. And, you know, these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have. What kind of culture, like he asked that question in Blueprint for Black Power, what kind of culture must we develop that will neutralize white supremacy? And that's the challenge he left us. And I think, you know, we should pick up that mantle in discovering what is that will dismantle white supremacy from the get.
Yeah, that is, and you know, Asar sent me a video prior to this broadcast where he was talking about just that, and I took some notes on it. He said culture cannot exist outside of oneself. It's in our minds. When you distort a person's culture, you distort their ability to process information. And that culture is a historical product. The way we love, the way we learn, and we're taught how to feel through culture. So it's very important that our culture meet our needs, as Asar said, because without culture, culture is what makes us Africans. The practicing of our culture. And as I just said, when they messed with our culture, when we were cut off from our culture, we interpret information differently. And you start doing the political acts of your oppressor, and you don't even know it. Amos Wilson says all the time, when you're most comfortable is when you're really oppressed. Mm. And when you feel most free That's when you're on the biggest stage of oppression. So he says this all the time. So, you know, it kind of puts culture in a perspective to where it's pushed to the forefront instead of just a backdrop. I wanted to bring up another point. He uses a term in his book, Falsification for African Consciousness, called social amnesia. And if you're not familiar with the term, social amnesia is basically when you go into a state of consciousness where you're forgetting just how dangerous your oppressor is and what he has done to you and what he continues to do. And that social amnesia is very dangerous in the mind of a Negro because, as I said earlier, you'll start to do things like your oppressor. So, you know, social amnesia is very critical. And we know a lot of people, even in our own families, with social amnesia. And, you know, you try to tell them, they try to remind them of some of these horrors, and, you know, we get the brick wall. But Amos Wilson really talks about how this is not only dangerous to our consciousness, but it's dangerous to our culture because our consciousness and culture are linked together. I heard Dr. Maat say earlier, he talked about how we should study history. Well, if we don't study this history, because people say it's not important anymore, history has an economical base to it, and he proves that as well. And we forget that. That's a part of that social amnesia. We forget that history is tied to economics, because if history wasn't so important, why would our oppressors go through all of this to change it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why is their version of history pushed to the forefront and they have all the money? It has to have an economical point to it. So he uses that to tell people, that's what you say to people that say, you know, history isn't important anymore, and, you know, you're living in the past. But he does also go on to say that you should use history for practical applications in this day and time. You can't get so focused on history that you don't face the danger right in front of you. You know, so our elder was brilliant with that. What's your favorite work by Amos Wilson, Dr. Maat?
Well, right now, again, I'm trying to comb through Blueprint for Black Power, but I would say the development of the psychology of the Black child. That's my favorite book right now. But I'm pretty sure that once I get into his other stuff, I'll probably say that those are my favorite works. I watch mainly his lecture, and the two books that I'm currently reading are Blueprint for Black Power and the development of the psychology of the Black child. I just also wanted to add this to what you were saying earlier, Black Panther. When you talked about social, what did you call it? Social amnesia, the term social amnesia. Yeah. And how you start to act out, you know, act as if, you know, act like your oppressors. One thing Brother Ankh used to always say to me, he said, Dr. Maat, you know, do you realize we see the world through European lenses? And I know that Dr. Amos Wilson also, Jalen, hand me that, please. I know that Dr. Amos Wilson, the plug, honey. I know that Dr. Amos Wilson also stated that we do see the world through, yes, honey, through,
Dr. Maat, did we lose her? Okay, maybe she's experiencing some technical difficulties. I'll message her to see what's going on. But in the meantime, Brother DJ, what is your favorite Amos Wilson work?
Yeah, I would say that my favorite Amos Wilson work. Well, first off, I use the Blueprint for Black Power as more so of a reference book, because what I found is that the Blueprint for Black Power is really, you know, a culmination of all of the previous work that Baba Amos, you know, had written. And so in the study of the Blueprint, you really learn, you know, not as detailed, but you get a broader view of all of the work that Baba Amos, produced. But I would say outside of the blueprint, my favorite book in terms of detailed analysis is Black on Black Violence. That book, in the age in which we live right now, especially with black male violence, is extremely important for us to understand. Like Dr. Maat and Brother Asar stated, the why these things happen. And let me give you an example of why I think that book is so important for my generation to really understand. Baba Amos breaks down the fact that whether you are a brother who may be a dope boy in the street, or if you are what he refers to as the bourgeoisie Negro, your tastes, your desires, your interests, and your values are essentially the same, right? That both groups of Africans are pretty much wired the same way, right? So the only thing that's different is the way that they go about fulfilling their tastes, their interests, their desires, and their values. So one brother may decide to, I'm going to get it, in the streets. The other brother may decide that I'm going to get it in corporate America. Well, on the surface, both of those, they may look totally different, but the taste, desires, the values, and the interests are essentially the same. Why? Because they both serve European cultural domination. You see, they just may have different ways or different methodologies about going about getting the S500 or the $1 million house. You see what I'm saying? There's a difference in the way that they may go about acquiring those things, but the tastes are essentially the same. And he has taught us to look for the constants, not the variations, but the constants in terms of a power dynamic between black people and white people in this country. If you pay attention to the constants, then you will understand that this is a system based on domination and control. Another practical example is that we have had in our community or in our race the prison industrial complex for many decades. This prison industrial complex has existed whether or not there was a Republican in the White House, or a Democrat in the White House. You get the prison industrial complex. So it doesn't matter what particular political group is in power. Those European constants you can see all around us. And we have to be able to understand it for what it is. Domination and control for the purpose of subjugation, and then eventually outright destruction or genocide on our people. So for me, again, black on black violence is critical for us to understand, not just so much of what goes on between those particular groups in our community, but even how it affects the quote unquote conscious community or the black power community. Much of the spillover that we encounter in our movement come as a result of so much of what we were exposed to while we were out in the matrix, so to speak, and really haven't totally gotten over or worked ourselves through in terms of that level of trauma. So we are works in progress. We know that. But at the end of the day, Dr. Amos Wilson, his work is essential, in my opinion, to move our race forward to power.
Absolutely. Dr. Maat, do we have you back?
Yes, I'm back. My computer, I was trying to get my son to hand me the computer cord. I was like, hurry up. And the computer ended up going to sleep on me. But yeah, I'm all good. I'm all back.
This is a star cue to have computer issues.
You said Asar and I?
Yeah, it's usually just Asar who has the computer issues. But I see today he got it going. Going good. But there's always somebody.
It was me today. I was just, before I got clicked off, I was just going to just talk about how Dr. Amos Wilson stressed individualism a lot, in his books and even in his lectures. He made me realize that he was saying that individual, he said being an individual, he called it a social fiction. He said, you're not an individual. He said, in this society or in Western culture, he said they teach, individualism, but he said that we had to understand that we are an extension of a collective. And so there's no such thing as an individual. He said, if you want to be an individual, I remember in one of his lectures, He said you can achieve that by, you know, totally isolating yourself and living in outer space. He said, but other than that, he said, as long as you are here, he said, you're not an individual. He said, in fact, we are a part of a social order, and that we are an extension. We are an extension of a collective. So he helped me realize that even in this struggle for our liberation, you know, we've been so so ingrained with individualism that we even have an individualistic approach to solving our problems. So, for example, I built with a lot of brothers and sisters on social media, and several of them have created and run African schools. And I remember making the suggestion. I say, how about this? How about, you know, all of us get together and design a curriculum that's implemented in all of these African-centered schools, you know, versus just, okay, this brother has a curriculum, this sister has a curriculum, the group over here has a curriculum. Can we come up with a global, you get what I'm saying, or national curriculum, and that we, you know, and that we allow it to be accessible online and also implemented, you know, in our local communities, you know, and, you know, I did, you know, propose that. But a lot of brothers and sisters are so inculcated with individualism. It's like, I have this going on. What about we? You know, can we organize, you know, under the, or come together and organize and combine, you know, our existing structures under the banner of nationhood? I know that Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that a lot. You know, this individualism that is running rapid in our community. I see a lot of brothers and sisters have programs, you know, people have a lot of good programs going on, but it's kind of like we're so spaced out. And like Dr. Amos Wilson talked about organizing having a global African system. He said that's, you know, he said only systems can combat systems. So he's like, you know, when you just have your one African-centered school or your one business going on, it's kind of like we're throwing rocks, you know, at a well-oiled machine. Like we're up against a machine right now. You get what I'm saying? And this machine is global. And Dr. Amos Wilson was saying, wait a minute, only systems can combat systems. So we as Africans need to come together and develop a global African system, you know, that we can design, that, you know, that will enable us to survive, you know, this system of racism and white supremacy. He talks about that, you know, a lot of in his work. So that's what I was going to go into before I was disconnected, just talking about the ideology of individualism. And I know Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that a whole lot, you know, and he was saying that we need to come together, you know, as a collective to battle, you know, this system of white supremacy. Like right now, and I just see that a lot of us are just, we're very unorganized and divided. I mean, you have certain groups who are organizing and building, but we need to build a global system, global. And that means reaching out to our brothers and sisters on the continent and getting them involved, you know, forming alliances with brothers and sisters on the continent. So we just, you know, that's what I was going to go into then before I was disconnected, just the spirit of individualism that Dr. Amos Wilson used to talk about a lot. And I didn't realize until, you know, reading his lectures and, well, listening to his lectures and reading his works, that yes, I have been inculcated with the spirit of individualism. I see it in my family. I see it in the community. I see it when I'm just simply networking with brothers and sisters on social media, how we have been inundated with that sort of ideology.
Absolutely, absolutely. Something that we all should can work on at different times. You know, it's easy to revert back to some of the things we were taught as children. You know, some of this stuff, some of this behavior that's you know, not really in line with the movement goes back to when we were children. So it's easy to slip back, but you know, that's why we have works from our ancestors to propel us to a state of consciousness and where we need to be. I'm afraid to ask Brother Asar this question, but I'm gonna ask anyway. What is your favorite work from Amos Wilson, Brother Asar? You're on mute, Brother Asar.
Okay. There really is no answer to that question. because every Amos Wilson book is a piece to the puzzle, you know, and so I can never put them in a hierarchy, you know, but you know, if I just had to answer the question, you know, with two guns and a white midget pointed at my face, it would be Blueprint.
Really?
Yeah. White midgets are scary. I don't know about y'all.
White people are scary in general, whether they regular size or large or whatever.
It's gonna be Blueprint for Black Power for me. You know, I told you before, like if you look through my book, every page has underline, circles, dots, whatever scribblies I do to make notes. I have stickies. I ran out of bookmarks, so it's toilet paper, old business cards, receipts. One of my old rent receipts from the money orders acting as bookmarks, you know, in this text. So it shows you that I frequent this, you know, quite regularly, you know, in my studies. And so with me being a scholar as well, it's not just simply, you know, it's a book I've read and, you know, I felt that it was inspiring or whatnot as I revisit all my texts, you know, in terms of as I grow to see what new I can get out of certain analyses, but also to, besides using them as resources, looking at their resources and how their source material influenced and shaped the work in which we're looking at, you know, currently. And so it's because of Amos Wilson, for example, that I was introduced to this book written by a Jewish dude called Tribes. And it is how race, religion, and identity determine success in the new global economy by Joel Kotkin. Now, if Black folks start talking about, you know, race first and the importance of coming together as Black people, we get all kinds of, we don't need da-da-da-da-da. But of course, this is the award-winning book. When a Jewish person tells you and gives you all the evidence of how race, religion, and identity determine success in the new global economy. And so in this text, he talks about 5 global tribes who basically have all the criterion to be successful in the new global economy. That is the British, the Americans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Indians. Notice not one African group named by him. And he lists from the beginning of the text, quite actually, 3 criterion that determine success as a people for this new global economy. And that is, it starts off number 1. I'm reading from page 4 of the book. It's going to be on page 4 and 5 of Tribes. A strong ethnic identity and sense of mutual dependence that helps the group adjust to changes in the global economic and political order without losing its essential unity. So a strong ethnic identity. 2, a global network based on mutual trust that allows the tribe to function collectively beyond the confines of national or regional borders. Number 3, a passion for technical and other knowledge from all possible sources, combined with an essential open-mindedness that fosters rapid cultural and scientific development critical for success in the late 20th century world economy, now 21st century. Now, I repeat, a strong ethnic identity, a global network based on mutual trust, and a passion for technical and other knowledge from all possible sources. And, you know, those of us who deal in the, what has been termed now the conscious community, know, for example, there's a good number of us who will say something like, we shouldn't learn or adopt and adapt certain knowledges and strategies because they come from people other than what we would consider modern African people.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't go get degrees. We shouldn't go to school. We shouldn't be in the books. We don't have to be in the technology and all of this other kind of stuff because, quote unquote, that's the white man's stuff. And bringing this back full circle to Amos Wilson, in one of his lectures, he talks about how even back in his day, you know, he would run into people in the community who would always stress that, you know, learning the sciences and technology and all of this other kind of stuff and reading text, this is all linear thinking, and linear thinking is European. And Amos Wilson would stress that linear thinking is not exclusive to European people. And creative, you know, circular thinking is not exclusive to Black people. What needs to happen is there a balance that, you know, when appropriate, you know when to use what strategies, you know, in order to be successful, depending upon the challenge of, you know, that particular space and time. And, you know, these are the kinds of things that I get out of the blueprint for Black Power. And I think that really the relationship to power is really something that we really don't understand. And I think he really had a good grasp of it, which is why this book is so thick, you know, from the beginning. I remember listening to a lecture where he was talking about completing the book. So remember, Dr. Amos Wilson died in 1995. Blueprint for Black Power doesn't come out until 1998. So it was finished posthumously, you know, by his students or whatnot who took his notes, you know, from the chapters and put the book together, you know. And he was explaining, you know, how, you know, a lot of us want to have that simple, fast microwave information, but the kinds of problems that we're facing takes a detailed analysis. It's going to require you to read and put that linear thinking, you know, to work. And I appreciate him for that. Not, you know, just taking that we need to be spiritual, you know, whatever that is. Not saying that that's not important,
right,
but that's all we need to be successful. We just call on the ancestors. The ancestors are going to come and kick the white man's ass, and then we'll be back at the top of rulership. And I'm not just making this up. I've actually heard this, you know, from certain people. And I think that Amos Wilson was more grounded, you know, in reality. And he, and like what was said in the Tribe's book, he was not afraid to take successful models, you know, from other groups and show how they can be successful and Africanized, you know, within, you know, our developing system, you know, here in the United States. So Blueprint for Black Power is my book.
I just wanted to add something, add on to what you were saying, Brother Asar. When you mentioned that Dr. Amos Wilson stated that, you know, his thoughts on why we should study other groups or adapt other behaviors from other groups. I remember in one of his lectures, he said, if you want to be powerful, then you have to study the ways of the powerful. You know what I mean? He also said that, you know, with regards to reading like works by Europeans, he said, when you don't read works by other groups of people, then you'll tend to have a limited perception. So, you know, Dr. Amos Wilson was dead on with that. You know, he was saying, hey, you know, yes, I will study the habits and behaviors of the powerful if I want to become powerful, you know, and if I want to have an expansive, you know, I guess perception, then I will go out and study works produced by other groups of people. So, you know, I just wanted to add that. I completely hear what you're saying, Brother.
You're absolutely correct, Dr. Maat. In looking at his lecture, on the one Asar sent me. He said that he was more concerned with Africanizing information. And he was saying that the source could come from anybody because your African-centered questions and intentions subvert the information. And he's saying if you can take information and make it work for you, you know, and he goes on to say that we must appropriate any form of thought that will advance our people. So in other words, we just can't throw it away because the guy wasn't sub-Saharan African. He may have something to get us out of this rut. And an example of that with Brother DJ and us lifting us, I can't remember the society, Brother DJ, but I remember you sending me something where the society was totally self-sustaining. And it wasn't an African society,
Right.
but I could still look at their model and go, well, you know, we can make this work for African people.
Right.
Yeah. And what you're referring to, Brother Ben, is the Mondragon Cooperative in the Basque region of Spain, which in a lot of ways is the catalyst for us lifting us. I mean, it's a community, you know, of Europeans, really of Basque, who consider themselves of a different ethnic origin than Spaniards, but they face, you know, oppression in the early formation of their society, and decided to, in defense of themselves and their way of life, to form themselves into a cooperative. So a group owned, you know, cooperative economy in that particular part of Spain. And so, you know, they always said that they were cultural nationalists. Now, these are Europeans, you know what I mean? Because it's important for us to understand that not all Europeans are culturally the same. You know what I mean? And so there are varying cultural variations, so to speak, even among Europeans. But this is how one particular group of Europeans decided to organize themselves to get out of their particular condition. And it is proven to be extremely effective, where they have virtually no unemployment. I mean, this cooperative generates billions of dollars a year and employs over 100,000 people. You know what I mean? And so when we look at, you know, the economic issues that we face, you know, in this country in particular, we have to be able to study models like that if we're serious about changing, like Baba Amos Wilson always said, if we're serious about changing the power dynamic between those in power and those of us who live under European cultural domination. So excellent example, Brother Ben.
Absolutely, brother. Go ahead, Asar.
No, just quickly to kind of build off of, you know, Dr. Oya and Brother DJ's comments, as well as yours. Firstly, in terms of an example of studying, and I get in trouble for this because, you know, we have a community of people who identify, you know, under this name. And that is, you know, the Moors, for example. Now, you know, when we hear a lot of our
here we go. Here we go.
Leave them alone.
My inbox is going to be blown.
I mean, well, you know, as a scholar, I can defend anything I say, but it's not in terms of the American idea of the Moors. I'm talking about the actual real historical Moors in Spain. So, you know, a lot of us want to identify with them, and because allegedly we brung the university, you know, streaming systems, education, science, technologies, and all of that to Spain. They say that they civilized Spain, right? But in my Amos Wilsonian mind, the subject really isn't the Moors. I think our focus should be on the Spaniards who kicked the Moors successfully out of Spain. Because the Moors, regardless of what they brought, they're an invading population, a foreign population who was occupying these indigenous people. So what are the historical mechanisms and situations that united these people that allowed them to fight off a colonial oppressor and successfully kick them out of their land, and then rebuild themselves up to become a world power afterwards? That's what should have been the study and focus for us, not the typical colonial, we had better weapons at the time, so we invaded you and, did what we did. But, what is the whole historical dynamic? And again, what are the relationships, the power relationships between the Moors and the people, and then the people themselves, with each other? And how did that all play out in the successful kicking out of a colonial power, in their native country? Like, that needs to be studied. And to the point of Brother DJ, I wanted to recommend, and I know I've sent these works to Brother Benjamin and Brother Black Panther, and that is a series of books on how to build sustainable communities. And the first book in this series by these Gaia Education Institute is Beyond You and Me, and inspirations and wisdom for building community. Now, these individuals, of course, is edited by white folks, but they're taking ideas from everyone across the world, regardless of ethnic background, religious orientation, or whatnot. They're looking, and there's all these contributions, even from Africans that are in this text, on what it takes to have a successful community. So then you have in the second series, Gaian economics. So the economics is the next point. Then designing ecological habitats, creating a sense of space. Now, the other book I have an ebook, but it has to deal with spirituality and stuff like this. But these are their 4 elements in creating a modern, sustainable community. Now, my question is, where is the African-centered version of this? Like, the next step in expanding and continuing Dr. Amos Wilson's works is to actually design a sustainable community in the manner in which Brother DJ spoke of earlier. They already have blueprints. This is what they're publishing. So when we look at our collective publishings, we're behind the ball. And these are the kinds of things that, and Amos Wilson has us looking at, and I'm pretty sure he would have been along, this past had he lived, longer and hadn't passed so suddenly. But this is the next step. And I appreciate the commentary by Brother DJ for that example, because that is real and it's happening. And white folks are building alternative communities, from the normal capitalist narrative that exists. And so while a lot of us are trying to blend in and just be Black capitalists, they're creating successful, sustainable communities, around the world. And they only draw from folks who have successfully done this. So these are not ideas that somebody has and then, okay, we're going to go do it and report back and see what happens. They're already doing it. And so they got the people who are already doing it successfully and showing you how they did it. And so this to me is, the next frontier for us.
Excellent.
Yes, we have to start creating, start building. And, a lot of people will probably look at that and say, there's only one way to build an African society, but that's just not true. And we have to use any resource that we can that will advance our people and not compromise our integrity as Africans. So that's an excellent analysis, brother. So I wanted to bring up, Amos Wilson had 5 things that he said that, well, I'm trying to bring it up in my notes. It's the 5 signs of mental slavery. And the first one is, what language do you speak? So he talked about the importance of language and the importance of learning an African language. But not only that, but how language shapes your reality and your perception. You know, just the words we use. We don't really realize, because we've been speaking English our whole lives, how the language says things without saying it. You know, I remember talking to this doctor, and he was talking about how male dominated English is.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, how so? And he said, well, what do we call the cycle in which women go through every month? And I was like, a menstrual cycle. And he was like, and I was like, oh. It didn't really hit me until then that this prefix, this men's, is in a lot of words where it really necessarily shouldn't go. And I know Asar probably chuckling to himself because he's probably seen this a lot with his linguistic experience. But you know, just the languages we speak can shape our cultures and reality. So his next question was, what name do you answer to? So, you know, everyone knows African people were robbed of our, what names that we would have been called by our ancestors being dragged to North America. So what is the name that you answer to? And most of us strive to find out where we come from, what tribe, what corner of Africa we come from, so we can go back and visit and make that connection and find out what our name would have been. You know, and that's a big part of your African identity. What do you call yourself, or what have you been initiated to now be known as? So that was one of his points. The third one was, what food do you eat? Because we know a lot of Africans that eat so-called comfort food. I call it slave food. You know, the chitlins, the hog maws, the you know, the stuff that has been proven to be detrimental to human life, not just African life, but everybody. No one should eat these things. You know, it's become a tradition in the South to eat these things around special occasions. So, you know, getting back into finding out what foods your people ate and what foods do they still eat. Try some fufu, or, you know, some jollof rice or something like that. You know, curve your diet to what your people would have been eating if you would have never left this region of the world. What God do you pray to? Who is your source of all creation? Who is your all in all, as I like to say? You know, Amos Wilson was also quoted as saying, can you even name one African god? Mm. And you know, we'd be surprised if you go around your neighborhood and ask. You probably gonna get a lot of people that say Allah, a lot of people that try to hit you with Black Jesus. But we know, as a people, we're not very knowledgeable in this subject of Black deities, of African deities, of deities that came from Africa via various spiritual systems. You know, that's very a part of our African identity. And the final one was, what clothes do you wear? Now, those of us with jobs, we have to dress a certain way when you go to your plantation, not judging you whatsoever. But in your spare time, in your time with your family, time with your friends, what do you wear? Do you have any African clothes? Or do you have European clothes with at least African statements on them? I mean, my whole closet is Black owned. That's that's just how I like to roll. And every one of my shirts has a statement. You know, some Medu Neture on it, some saying Kofa bird, Black Power fit, something. You know, I like to put something out there maybe just even as a conversation starter with other Africans that may like the shirt and get into some Black African power that way. But those were his 5 things that if you don't know about any of the things that I'm talking about, or these questions confuse you, you still might be under mental slavery. So I wanted to just share that. So sorry, are you trying to talk right now? Because you're on mute if you are.
My bad. I know I got this buzzing sound in the background, so I got to mute my mic every now and then. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And to a certain extent, you know, as I said, there's a group, 3 individuals who kind of shape the direction in which I'm going. It's Diop, Karenga, and Amos Wilson in terms of the cultural piece and the identity, and it inspired. This is my 2nd book that I published way back in 2009 called The Bacala of North America, The Living Sons of Vitality, in search of a meaningful name for African Americans. And when you ask that one question of, you know, what language do you speak and stuff like this, this all is under his discussions on the importance of identity and how identity is central to the maintenance of power. And so, you know, taking his advice and others' advices from the continent itself, I took it upon myself to look into African languages and find a word that, in my mind, captures the essence of who we are as African Americans, and to bring forth an identifier, you know, based upon our shared continental African and our indigenous African American, you know, cultural traits. And so, you know, this book was my defense, but in many respects is inspired, you know, by Wilson and his insights into identity. But also, you know, there's many people I can name, but also the late Dr. Asar, another psychologist, you know, who really, you know, who's another person who's really kind of under the radar for a lot of folks in terms of his contributions and insights. Matter of fact, a lot of our psychologists, you know, one of our last living pioneers, you know, is Dr. Wade Nobles, you know, and he's another one of them. You know, we have Naeem Akbar also out there in Florida and stuff like that. And a whole host. I used to go to the Black psychologists, you know, conferences way back in the day. You know, because you know, me being a computer scientist, you know, psychology is also a field under that study. So psychology, mathematics, and linguistics, you know, all fall under this banner, you know, of the study, especially if you're doing artificial intelligence. So you have to study psychology, you have to study language, all of that good stuff. But anyway, and so, you know, when I say I'm a serious Wilsonite, you know, I'm dead serious, and you know, you'll see him in you know, quoted in the works, you know, and a matter of fact, I had to use him in our defense at the quote unquote debate that never happened in New York, you know, against 2 individuals whose names I won't mention. But I want to just, you know, I like to quote him so people can understand, you know, the depth of who he is. And this is from the falsification. I'm citing my book, Where is the Love? How Language Can Reorient Us Back to Love's Purpose. It's a linguistic analysis of the word love, but of course I switch it and show how love is the basis of all economy. And that's all explained in the text. But Amos Wilson in The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy, written in 1993. As far as the economic systems and stuff is concerned, he says, we're suffering from the absence of an economic system. Money is not a system. Money is what it is. A system involves the systematic and organized utilization of money. A systemized utilization and distribution of money. Without the pattern, without the system, without the organization, one does not have an economy. An economy exists prior to money. There were economies in the world before money was invented.
That's true.
We don't even have to have money to have an economic system. So ultimately, when we study an economic system, we recognize that an economic system at its base refers to the nature of the relationship between people. It's the systematic way people relate. It's the systematic way people choose to relate one to the other that makes an economic system, not money. When we lack a systematic way of relating to each other, then we can have money and still be poor, have money and be robbed, which we are. He goes on further. Now I won't read all of it. I'll just read this important part. He says, why do we suffer from the problems then? Why is a Black personality created? I try to get across that for the fact that every maladjusted characteristic in a Black personality serves an economic function. Each maladjusted characteristic is not there by accident. It's not there simply because Europeans hate us. It's there to maintain an economic dominance. If I got money, I can help you. But if I distrust you, I won't help you. And you may not make it. It's not the absence of money, it's the presence of mistrust. If I will not cooperate, if you cannot rely on me, then we cannot have an economic system, even though we may have money. In other words, if people must trust, be reliable, be dependable, have respect for each other if they are to develop a viable economic system. When they have those kinds of relationships, they have a social system and they can build and they can grow economically. Now I say that in relationship to the debate, because there was a series of things that went down in the debate, but it just underscored fundamentally for those who know what was going on, how not being reliable, how not being trustworthy, all had an economic impact or not one of, surrounding the type of event. And fundamentally what we have in the African American community a lot is a large mistrust for each other. And this idea, you've heard it 1,000 times, that, other people's ice water is colder than ours. And so the fundamental question is, how do we build the kinds of relationships that we need, the kinds of trust and reliability on each other, that we can depend on each other and see each other as instruments for being able and individuals who are able to solve my individual problems. Because what I show in this text, Where is the Love, is that the word love fundamentally comes from an African word meaning hand in art. And to show love literally is a verb meaning to extend your hand and arm in service of someone else, to give them something. Fundamentally, the secondary meaning is to feed someone. So it's basically when you're feeding someone, you're nourishing them. They have their energy has diminished. You feed somebody to bring them back up to optimality, to optimum efficiency and energy and vitality. And as a, because we deal with Maat here, no pun intended, doctor. The reciprocity in this is that it costs me energy to serve or restore you. You give me something to bring me back into balance. And it's this exchange that becomes the economy. But I have to trust that what you have to offer me is for my benefit and vice versa, And so these are these fundamental things that when you study these works of Amos Wilson, that a lot of it gets missed, because of his, he writes very eloquently. But, in the final analysis is really just about how do we relate to each other and what is the systematic ways in which we handle conflict between each other and restore, you know, good human and harmonious relationships. Because if we don't have that, any other effort that we have down the pipeline will more than likely fail.
Very, very powerful stuff. Brother DJ, I know that you have to get ready to go in a minute. So give us your final thoughts, brother.
You know, I just felt that that brother Asar threw me the ultimate alley-oop in his breakdown of economics. And so what I'd like to do in my closing comments is just kind of bring it all home to really show in a practical way, you know, my personal relationship with Dr. Amos Wilson and how much his work has impacted me, you know, in the work that I express in our community. Brother Asar is absolutely correct in his analysis from Baba Amos's perspective on economics, because economics is first and foremost a social system. This is what Baba Amos first told us. And so just like Brother Asar said, you know, you have an economic system prior to money, right? And it is essential that you have an economic system prior to money. But what you also need to have before you have an economic system, you have to have a system of social relationships that decide how to organize, manage, control, and facilitate scarce resources among people. Okay, so your interests are organized around your culture, and this is why economics and culture are so important, so inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. So now, why is it, as those of us who prescribe to African nationalism, Black nationalism, conscious community, Black power movement, deal with the issues oftentimes that we deal with? Because we don't have adequate social arrangements. We are trying to organize ourselves around a European cultural construct known as the economics of capitalism. That is not reflective of who we are. That's not reflective of our culture, our values, our ways of relating, our spirituality, or any of those things. So when we practice capitalism, we are actually expressing European power and control in our own lives. This is why it is so hard for us to develop viable institutions, businesses, and organizations. Now, taking it all the way back to the fundamental premise of why I saw fit to organize this institution known as the Black Power Awards. It goes right back to the things that Baba Amos laid out in the blueprint for Black Power. So if an economic system is reflective of social relationships, and without such you don't have power, it is absolutely essential for us to come together in large groups to begin to, number one, identify the culture, but identify the culture in a way that it can be successfully marketed to the next generation of young people. It's extremely important for us to understand that. So now, in the Black Power Awards, we made it a requirement for us to dress in upscale cultural attire, right? Because we wanted to put forth an ambiance of success. Why? Because no people want to be associated with anything that is unsuccessful or is synonymous with losing. You see, so it was important for us to see ourselves in a positive light when we stepped into this particular venue, and we were highly successful. Now, what does that mean? That means that the Black Power Awards as an institution has to be able to anchor the high moral standing, the principles, the culture of what it means to be an African, not only in a politicized African, not only in America, but around the world. What do we eat? What do our families look like? What do we read? How do we socialize with each other? All of these things are an indelible part of what culture is, you see, and it's important for us to be able to successfully market that, not just to people who think like us, but people who don't think like us, so that they may at some point be attracted to this particular expression of our lifestyle or our way of life. So again, on a practical level, this is just an example of what the blueprint for Black Power, Baba Amos Wilson specifically, and what the institution of of the Black Power Awards is designed to do.
Man, powerful, powerful stuff. Powerful. And I hope that people are listening and taking heed to the lessons that everybody on the panel is giving out, coming from our Baba Amos Wilson. Before you get out of here, DJ, I want to ask everybody on the panel one question. Is it safe to say that because of Amos Wilson's work and his influence on our lives, is it safe to say that Meltrek, the Black Power Awards, and Mandu Indela are products of our ancestors' great teachings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, then he will live forever. because he's given us something to take into the next generation. He's inspired you three Africans to build things that have extended long past his life on this earth, and that's very important, and that's what we should all be striving to do. So he did his job. He fulfilled his mission, you know, and now he's a distinguished ancestor. And Egungun is what we would call him in Ifa. So, you know, we love the great ancestor, and that's just awesome that he inspired you Africans to create something that's great for the community and to get us back on track. Capitalism, you know, it perpetuates one of the most dangerous things to an African, and that's universalism. And you know, Amos Wilson talks about one way to just neutralize a strong African is to teach this universal principle to him, because it's a delusion. I mean, it's an illusion. It puts us all on this equal playing field. And it says, well, you know, it's not about race. It's not about culture. It's not about black. It's not about white. It's not about any of that. Anybody can get some of this pie if you do the right things and work hard and all that other stuff. But when it's time to divvy out the money from capitalism, the first things that separate people are culture, race, creed, gender, sex, and all the other things that they claim didn't exist.
Right. So
that is dangerous to the African, because you run into these people. I don't see color. I'm just free. I'm a free spirit. I'm spiritual. I just look at the spirit of a person, and all of these things that we've been taught to think and regurgitate. And then, you know, these are the first people that are just shocked when things like Trayvon Martin happen, when things like you know, the all of our slain teens and adults that have been just murdered in the street. Those are the first people that are shocked, and I always give them that look like, you're shocked by this? And then I had to go back and think about it. They live in a world where this stuff is gone. This stuff doesn't exist. This stuff is supposed to be, we're supposed to evolve past this as a human race. And that's when you know someone is caught up in universalism, because they're not looking at reality for what it actually is. And, you know, it's a type of escapism, you know, and it ties into that social amnesia that Amos Wilson was talking about. So whenever you meet some of these people, you know, you have to really start looking at them differently. They're suffering, and they've placed things in their mind to not deal with reality. You know, Dr. Maat, you wanted to say something?
Oh, no, I'm good. I was listening.
Oh, okay.
My little 6-year-old was getting ready to pop his head on the screen, and I was like, no.
I understand. You know, universalism ties right into multiculturalism. Get rid of that too, please, because it's another, you know, another one of those things where, you know, everyone's good and everyone respects each other, and none of that stuff exists, and it's all just an illusion. You know, HBCUs right now are under attack, and they're under attack from an order put out by our former president that they have to have a multicultural event yearly. So why the hell do they have to have a multicultural event? Why would you force these people to have a multicultural event? It's to further maintain the status quo. And to further get people to start thinking in this mode of, well, I love African people, but my other friends aren't so bad, and they accept me as an African man, and we can build things together, and that's not true. Amos talks about the Japanese and the Chinese and how their perception is. They don't hire us, and it's true. You haven't seen an African working in a Chinese restaurant in your life.
Hold on. In West Philly,
I had a job in a Chinese restaurant. I'm putting it out.
I haven't, but see the I don't know if they're Chinese, Japanese, or whatnot, but by their phenotype, I assume they're East Asian.
Asar. That's unscientific.
I gotta be scientific always. So what they do now, they've updated the strategy. So when they're in the black neighborhoods, because in West Philly, where I live, allegedly, if you go and see the Asian restaurants, clearly Asian restaurants, right? Or some other type of restaurants, and we'll say Asian, at the front will be black people working, as the people on the register, sometimes cooking the meals or something to this nature. But of course, it's the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, or whatnot in the back who are the actual owners of the business. So what they'll do, because I think Philly has a different consciousness, is put the black people up front, but it's still the ownership of the facility is East Asian. And it's the same way with a lot of these Muslim run spots. So, West Philly's like Muslim capital. It's literally like Mecca, Medina, all that over now. So then, I'm in the midst of Islam Central. So you'll see, a lot of these Islamic restaurants and things of that nature. Again, black folks working up in the front, but the person who owns it, is an Arab, and then the common thing is that they're, Muslims. So the strategy is changing.
That's that's the one thing about supremacy, man. It's ever changing. They have to keep up because we catch on. We catch on quick, and we'll be like, "Well, I ain't shopping there." So they like, "Hold on, I'm losing all of my revenue from the black community." Hey, Tyrone, would you like a job? Hey, brother over there, would you like a job? Oh man, they didn't change. They started to hire black folks. Let's go down there. No, they got you.
I'm like, why can't black folks own a Chinese restaurant? Like, what's preventing black people from owning? If black people, look, I used to date this sister in New York when I was living in Houston, and so I come visit her. She lived in the farthest part of Manhattan, and so New York don't sleep. So 2-3 o'clock in the morning, shops are open like it's 12 noon. So I get the late night munchies. I walk down the strip and I see this Italian pizzeria, right? So I walk in, and really what happened is the pizzeria is no longer there. And so it's really a Mexican food restaurant. So I'm like, okay, well, I eat Mexican food. I'm not too picky. I'll eat some Mexican food. But behind the bar is some Chinese people, So one, we're in first of all, it's the neighborhood is Puerto Rican Spanish. So an old Italian restaurant transformed into a Mexican restaurant, but owned, by a Chinese, Japanese, couple. And I just thought that to be the most ironic thing ever. And I'm like, so there was no Mexicans who made it this far north that they could have opened a Mexican restaurant, you know, in Spanish Harlem and all this other kind of stuff. Like, what's the deal here? And so, you know, like we need to change our strategy. Like, we don't have to, like I always say, you don't have to create a business that is RBG, you know, for the world. That seems to be the idea, you know, for a lot of us in the community. If it ain't a RBG business, you know, it ain't what it is. I'm like, look, you better go out there and open you an Italian restaurant, because they open it in Houston in 3rd Ward. There is a Chinese-owned African-American soul food restaurant.
They have them in Baltimore, brother Asar. They have them in Baltimore. I was getting ready to add that in Baltimore. There are Asians who own soul food carryouts right here in Baltimore. Right here in Baltimore.
There's nothing that says that we can't do what they do and do it better. You know, they're in the black neighborhood in Houston cutting black people hair for cheaper, and all of us are flooding there. So $5 haircuts. And so, you know, it costs $20 for me to get a haircut, you know, here in Philly. So if they offering $5 haircuts, you know, us, you know, we don't value, you know, our people and our businesses. So it's like, oh, we'll just get it cheaper, you know, say from the Chinese folks. Yeah, and that's what they go do.
There's no loyalty.
Exactly. But then when it comes to items that they feel are valuable, let's say some Jordans, let's say some Louis Vuitton, they want everyone to know that they paid the full price, you know, directly from or directly to, you know, saying the manufacturers, and they got it from the authentic place and da 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 da. But when it comes to the haircut and all this, they can't spend an extra $5, $10 on products. You know, our people are, you know, and we're all still trying to make sense of this. But I want to interject this, and I want to get your thoughts. And that is, you know, something that Dr. Amos Wilson discusses a lot, but really doesn't get much play, is the study of military science in warfare. In the psychology and economics and all of that. Matter of fact, the Blueprint for Black Power in the 3rd chapter, there's a section on there, the spirit of war, and how to utilize that. But in his lectures and all that, he's always talking about that. And so how important is that? Because we keep saying that, you know, we're under war, you know, that they declare war on us. But why in our analysis are we not studying, for example, the science of war? Defense budgeting, military technology, logistics, and combat outcomes. If this is war, you know, why isn't war strategies, the science of war? Do we have a department in the RBG community that all they do is study war, logistics, and all of this? We don't have our, you know, Army Corps of Engineers and, you know, all of this other kind of stuff. Like, how important is that, y'all think, you know, to this struggle?
I think military science is definitely, or the study of military science is extremely important, you know, in this liberation movement. And the reason being, brother Asar, is this, because we talk about nation building. Okay, so once we build our nation, we have to be able to protect our nation. So, you know, I get, you know, nation building and power, you know, practicing group economics and things of that nature. But once we build this nation, we have to be able to protect it. You get what I'm saying? Like, I'm right now in my mind, brother. So I'm thinking about, you know, the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots in 1921. And yes, there were brothers that were there who had guns, you know, but they didn't, you know, they had this town, they had little Africa. So they had this town where blacks, you know, were self-sufficient, but they didn't have the capacity to really protect it. You get what I'm saying? There were some brothers again there. When I was reading the story, they said that some brothers, you know, did have guns and they went out and they fought. but they didn't have a system there, you know, that protected that community as a whole. The brothers had guns, yes, they did. But like you said, where was the Black army? Where was the Black, you know, the military that could come out and defend itself, you know, against things of that nature? So I think that, I vehemently feel that, you know, the study of military science is very important. I know that Kwame Nkrumah talks about it in his book, Nation Building. He was saying that that should be a part of an African-centered curriculum, you know, that they should have, you know, military science. They should have STEM. You know, a lot of people are scared to put their children in STEM, but, you know, they have labs. Like our government has labs where they're developing, you know, sophisticated weaponry, viruses, you know, gases, you know, so they work every day. I believe that 50 or 60% of the American budget is spent on military. I think that's the breakdown. I had the numbers in my mind, but I want to say that they say 60% of the American budget is spent on the military. It's spent on intelligence, 60% of our budget. So, you know, if you want to, again, study the habits of the powerful, right? Because again, Dr. Amos Wilson said, you want to be powerful, then you had to study the behavior or the characteristics of powerful people. Well, powerful people spend millions of dollars on learning how to protect that power, how to maintain that power and protect that power. So again, I do vehemently feel that the study of military science is definitely important. So once we nation build, we'll have the capacity to protect this nation.
Okay. Excellent points, Dr. Maat. Y'all know they finna jump on me, because every chance they get, they have to remind me that I was once a member of the United States Army, which is 100% true. But somehow in people's mind, that makes me an agent or whatever they want to come up with this month. So, because I'm still trying to figure out where my agent check is. When am I gonna get my agent check?
Well, I guess, Ben, I would
supposed to get paid, don't they?
Yeah, and I was getting ready to say I must be an agent too, because I did 8 years. I'm prior service myself. I signed a 6 and 2 contract, 6 years active reservist and 2 years inactive reservist. So I went in 1998 and got out in 2006. So I guess that would make me an agent also.
They forget John Henry Clark was in the military as well, but I'm not going to bring all that up because maybe, you know, they didn't know that. But I would say just from my training in the military, the things that I've seen, the weaponry that I've taken apart, put together, shot, been in part of training simulations, I would say that we definitely, without a doubt, need a branch studying military science. If not only to just study what our oppressors have, because I've said it before, they got some weapons that don't need to touch you to hurt you. If anybody watches the movie Smoking Aces, where Taraji P. Henson is behind that gun, shooting through the window, and I know it looks futuristic and you're like, well, that doesn't exist. Yes, it does. It's called a Barrett, B-E-R-E-T. Google it. It is a 50 cal sniper rifle. The bullets are probably as big as this tube of tea tree oil. This is probably the length and width of the bullet. And this is whizzing past you. Now you got to think, in this weapon, the spring is probably as long as my wingspan, condensed to this. So when they push that trigger, that spring jolts and contracts back. That's what's sending this big ass bullet by you at almost hyper speed. So if it does not hit you, it is moving past you at such a velocity, it can break your arm just by whizzing past you. And if it hits you, it's a wrap. I don't care what kind of vest you got on, it's going through it. That's it. So if we just have a department to study what the military has and try to replicate those weapons for our advantage, it would be helpful. Because we got to know. What you got on that red box, man?
The Accountant. You seen that movie?
The Accountant. No.
I think he was using that sniper rifle in The Accountant. You got to see the movie.
Yeah, they take real weapons from the military. They want the movie to be, you know,
authentic,
as possible. So, you know, these things are real. If you ever seen the movie Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, that's the type of Barrett he was using. So,
see, what people don't understand as a means of strategy, that's what they let you know they have.
Yeah. What about the stuff that nobody's seen?
Exactly. That is top secret. That they're just looking for an opportunity to test in the field type stuff.
I'm gonna tell you, I was in the military when they first started incorporating drones. It was around 2011, 2010, and they had this drone called the Predator. Initially, drones were just used to spy on people. They would throw the drone and they could control it like a video game and just spy on the enemy. Well, the enemy started taking out the drones. So they made drones with weapons. And that's how these drone strikes and things started to come about. People taking down their surveillance systems. Like, okay, well, we want to make a surveillance system with some bang. So that's how that came about. And, you know, those are just the drones that made it to the field. Like you say, they got a whole heap of stuff that they release in tiny increments until it becomes something, you know, big. You know, a lot of things that we have are benefits of military research. If you got any kind of pointer that you use in your presentations, understand that came from a military research project. They started to test way back in the day how lasers could be used for accuracy and things of that nature. So that's a benefit of a military research project. But we're not going to get it until, you know, they've been using it. The Hummer, that's a military research project. We got the Humvee in the military. It's the same car. People just thought it'd be cool to drive in real life.
But they say, brother,
they got that gas.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, they say that the government is what, 60 or 70 years ahead of us. I believe that's what the number is, 60 or 70.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Technology.
I don't know about, yeah. I mean,
I
but even still, like,
I've seen some things in the Army Times that didn't come out until a couple of years after they published it. I'm like, that's real? Like they used to have these.
I mean, the very internet, you know, because people don't understand. A university is an instrument of the military. It is a branch of the military. It may not seem it. You know, you may not see, depending on what university you go to, you know, any tanks and all of that. But a university is a branch of the military wing, which is why, for example, most universities, at least historically, their logos are shields. A shield is a defense mechanism. You know, when they want to pull, like if there's an impending danger or whatnot, they pull from the universities. They get military clearance to come and handle these situations, to design these weapons. That's what they're looking, you know, to do, to recruit these folks, you know, from here. And that's where they, you know, they get their next stars in this. They got, people understand, you know, on another note, we talk about scholarship and being able to have peer-reviewed, you know, material from journals and whatnot. The military has journals that you have to have a certain level of clearance to even read. They're not public, but they're still peer-reviewed. There's certain laws of nature that are under military, basically gag orders that cannot be released. And this isn't conspiracy theory type stuff. This is for real, because, you know, knowledge is power. And so you can't have, for example, it was held a secret, you know, in terms of continental shifts and, you know, the depths of the ocean floor and all of this other kind of stuff, because, you know, if the enemy would know about, you know, of course, certain, you know, radars in the distance that you can detect, you know, what kind of objects are in the ocean and what size and all this. So this information was kept secret, you know, for a while. But just think about that. There's laws of nature that they have discovered, and there's journals for the military that you have to have security clearance to actually read and things of this nature. They also have, like, we don't even think about this. See, white people, their culture is based on this idea that there's going to be a big calamity, catastrophe that basically ends the world. You know, we know this linguistically. We can reconstruct this linguistically. But of course, when you look at a lot of their modern films, like the, you know, World War Z, you
all
know,
of them got something to do with the world ended.
The world ended. That's their mentality. We think the time is forever, so we don't prepare for, you know, no world ending and stuff. That's not in our religions, you know, but that's in their religion. But as a result of that thinking, when you go into the North Pole, the United States has a facility there that is called a seed bank. It's a bank that is buried. It's a big facility that's buried under ice with nothing but the world's seeds. So if some big disaster happens, they can go back and replant food, you know, depending upon how successful. But, you know, people experiment with underground farming and stuff like this.
And then other stuff like that.
So, like, when I think of the conversations that a lot of us are having on Facebook and YouTube and even on the block sometimes, I think about the seed bank in the North Pole. You know, like, we don't even have our clothes on yet to even walk to the bus, to be in the parking lot, in the building where the real conversation is having. We're not even in the vicinity, you know, of where the serious conversations are having. And we're having silly arguments, silly discussions all of the time in a lot of our so-called conscious circles. And it upsets me. Right. You know, you may hear it in my voice, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to add to what you were saying just now, Brother Asar. I remember Dr. Amos Wilson said that a lot. He used to say, you know, while we're bull jiving, they have think tanks going on, you know, where they're coming up with, you know, ideas on how to maintain global supremacy, how to survive, and we're bull jiving. So I completely concur with what you're saying, Brother Asar. You know, a seed bank. I remember on Facebook one time I put a post up, and I was talking about squirrels, and I was saying, you know, we look, you know, with being, I guess, indoctrinated by Eurocentrism or Eurocentric mentality, having this Eurocentric mentality, we act as if animals are beneath us, right? But then when you study animals, you see that animals operate actually better than we do as human beings. You know, even when you look at squirrels, I know that squirrels gather nuts for the winter, like for the season. So they have a stash, you know, they have a stash set aside to prepare for tomorrow. So when you started talking about the seed bank and how if something were to take place, how they have seeds that they can plant and grow foods again. What do we have, Brother Asar? And like you said, so we're on Facebook arguing back and forth, having frivolous conversations, and you have people who are thinking about survival. You know, their conversation, their focus, their energies are on surviving and maintaining global supremacy. That's what they're thinking.
Hasn't met an expert in sight.
You know what? You know what, Brother Asar?
We got a and it says it's from Brother Kofi Nkrumah Nuru Amen. He says, by our nature, we don't sit around thinking of ways to destroy. How do we come into that type of cultural thinking without losing our ability to be human beings? And my answer to that, and I'm gonna let you guys build on that as well, is in every African spiritual system that I've studied, from the east to the west, to the north to the south, to Central Africa, there are deities of war. Every one of them got one. I'm wearing one right now. Ogun, deity of war. We have always came up with ways to defend ourselves. Now, I'm not saying, we need to make nuclear bombs or something extreme like that, like our oppressors, but we need to be coming up with ways to defend ourselves and defend our families and our culture and our very essence of being African. We need those defense mechanisms. And Amos Wilson talks about it. I think Brother Asar said it earlier. Culture should defend. It's got to defend. And if we raise our seeds in the African culture will start to defend itself, because it would be so strong and so bold, and we'll be creating things, and we'll have a community, and everybody on the community understands the objective and understands the danger. And we have no social amnesia, or very little social amnesia within the community. And everybody knows that these dangers are real. So we start to invent things that will defend the culture, defend the people, defend the women, defend the children, defend the elders. We do that. Shango's symbol is a double axe. I haven't forgotten that. That axe ain't for fanning himself. That axe is for wielding and chopping. Ogun's tools include machetes. And them machetes ain't for cutting weeds. They for cutting up enemies. So we need to remember that, and remember that we have rituals of war. The Haitian Revolution, they did egbars, or sacrifices to deities to get ready for war. They knew the war was coming. They prepared themselves for this war. So African people are no strangers to war. We fought all the way from Kemet to South Africa, to East Africa, to Central Africa, to West Africa. We fought. Sometimes we were fighting each other. Sometimes we were fighting oppressors. But we're no strangers to war. So it shouldn't be a big transition to fight people or create things to protect our very survival. It shouldn't be a huge transition. Go ahead, Dr. Maat.
No, I was going to actually just, say that I can concur with you when you started talking about the different deities, of war. In my mind, I thought about Sekhmet. I thought about Oya. So again, like you said, even if you study the African spiritual systems, there were deities. Absolutely. That even Maat. Like, come on, like when people think about Maat, it's harmony and it's balance and it's truth. But like Brother Asar said, they forget about, reciprocity. You forget about that, so even Maat. So again, I think that I don't want to say that was one of the downfalls of our ancestors, but I remember hearing Professor James Small talk about how the clash came when you had the war culture, meet the agricultural culture. You get what I'm saying? So these people, he was saying, imagine, if, you were a church going person and you guys were just church people, and then you were up against, some Vietnam vets, came into the church and tried to ransack the church and harm the church. He said, who do you think would win? Would it be the Vietnam vets who just came home from war? Or would it be, the church going folks who never, trained for it? So, you know, he was saying that was kind of like, even though we did fight, I mean, I'm not saying that they easily came in and just conquered us, but, you know, they had a war culture. And I think that, you know, that is nothing wrong with inventing mechanisms to protect ourselves. You know, now we look at it and see, we have to, when we study history, again, as Dr. Amos Wilson says, we have to take that knowledge, that wisdom, and that inferences and see where they went wrong in trying to build, you know, another nation or revitalize our nation or our civilization. And one thing I think that we went wrong, we just didn't have that system of protection and defense. I think they got us at a point. I think Dr. Clark talks about this, how they got, you know, Egypt when it was getting old and she was getting a little weak, that's when, you know, the invaders came in and were able to successfully conquer us. But I think that there's nothing wrong with, you know, designing mechanisms and inventions to defend ourselves better than we did before, so we won't find ourselves in the exact same situation once we rebuild, you know, our civilization.
Well, you know, even the war cultures, when they were attacked, technology overcame some of them. You know, a spear and the arrow is cool, but the cannon.
But the gun and the cannon, yeah. I mean,
what I want to do against that? This is serious, and we have documented occurrences of this happening. Before I go to Asar, I was just reminded by what you were saying about Oshun. Oshun is an Orisha that's she's known as a part of the warriors. If anybody practices Ifa, that you'll hear them referred to as the warriors. Have you received your warriors? And she's the only female energy in the warriors, and she's known as, you know, the loving energy. And some people question why she's in the warriors. Well, yeah, she's loving, but she's still a warrior. And when she's on your behind, she could make it difficult for you. So Oshun, as loving as she is, she still wields a sword. So even being loving and harmony and all this great stuff, we can still defend ourselves.
That's right.
Our ancestors have given us many examples of this. So we can't get caught up in just, you know, being harmonious. Yeah, be harmonious with your people. When the oppressors come around, that's when it's time to get down. Well, go ahead, Asar.
I would just like to add, you know, that something that has to be mentioned, and that is people need to decide on what level and in what front they want to participate, if they do, in this movement. There's a civilian movement, and then there's a military movement. And we got to understand that civilians operate under a different milieu than a military in any society. And there's certain ideas that and compromises that as a civilian you wouldn't do, but as a military officer you may be confronted with and have to make a life, you know, altering decision. You know, of course, the main thing is killing someone. And I'm not saying that we have to go around killing someone, but if it boiled down to that point, do you have that in you to take someone's life to save others? And I'm not trying to be quote unquote militant in the negative sense. I'm just talking about reality. Now, Amos Wilson talks about, you know, the spirit of warfare, learning military strategy. I'm a person who has done martial arts practically my entire life. And one of the things that we know about martial arts is that martial arts ain't about the truth. Martial arts is about deception. It's about lying. It's not about, you know, having an honest, you know how like back in the day in the militaries, at least the European militaries, it would be a drum line of individuals, and they would just walk out in a straight line, 2 parallel lines, and then they'll just start shooting at each other. All that changed once they met the Native Americans who were hiding in trees and in ditches and doing guerrilla warfare. Warfare changed for the European at that point. You know, they realized real quick, even if they had the technology, you know, it's a strategy that that determines things, and you have to be deceptive in a sense. And I'm saying all this to say this, that, you know, when we're talking about these things, you don't have to be the over boisterous, quote unquote, RBG flag wearing, gun toting, you know, individual. It's about deception. The strategies that they use, they will use the most non-threatening person to come and dismantle your whole organization. And they have this documented. They have this stuff on video like it's nothing. And Black people still have yet to learn their lesson. For example, with the COINTELPRO situations between like the Black Panthers and the US organization, US government was writing letters talking about people cheating on their wives and all this other kind of stuff. People get all out of whack, and now these organizations can't work with each other. You put it in the modern day, all we have to do is start a Facebook rumor, and all hell breaks loose, and we can't work together and do that.
That's true. That is so true.
Man.
That's so true, Brother Asar.
Like, you have to have protocol. You have to think military. A military operates differently. Why can't you use the same strategies against them? If you're really talking about, you know, doing something serious, you know, and there's some other strategies I won't mention here that Black Panther has clearly rejected, but they have used. I won't even mention it, but they have used and continue to use these strategies. He laughing because, you know, it's really, you know, crazy, but it's not crazy when you start thinking, because I'm telling you, it's a different mode of thought that you have to have if you're on the military side, you know, of the defense versus the civilian, you know, saying side. And so, you know, I just want to stress to the people that, you know, you have to take certain things into consideration, you know, when you're trying to do this work, and that this work is not for the faint of heart, and that you have to have a certain soldier's mentality, a certain level of patience and understanding, but also you have to be an individual that can keep their mouth shut, who does not tell the whole strategy in the world that this is what we're doing, this when we're going to do it, and this how we're going to do it. You just do it and tell the world this is what we've done. This is what's happening after it's too late. The government tells you stuff when it's too late. They'll tell you, well, we're going to do this, and then blah, blah, blah. When martial law, they tell you martial law is coming, the troops are already on the ground, you know, ready. And so, you know, we have to think differently. And so, you know, another one of our great teachers out of Chicago, I forget his name. He wrote the book Intellectual Warfare. Meta-Nature book. How can I forget that fast? They're gonna kill me in the audience. This is a name you should all know. And he's from Texas too, and it'll come to mind later. It's only because I need to think of it now. It just slipped my mind. But he wrote the book. There you go, by Jacob Carruthers. You know, he's talking about this is an intellectual warfare. Then we need to be thinking warlike, but at the same time, to answer the fundamental question that I don't know if it was a brother or sister was asking, African people have had strategies of trying to reintegrate warriors coming from war back into the society. You were considered unclean after coming from battle. And so you just couldn't come back into the society and blend in like you're well, because they understood that killing is unnatural, you know, for us. And so it's a spirit that comes upon you when it's time to do that duty. And it needs to be treated. You need to be treated as a whole person, and your humanity needs to be restored before we can bring you back, you know, and exist harmoniously in our society. And on some level, we need to have those periodic things for even us who are involved in this movement, you know, who have taken on the military side and just need that, you know, this is where the cultural development comes in, to where we develop these cultural rituals where we reintegrate ourselves back and have those human moments, you know, before we go back out there and continue to do what we need to do. Like, you know, like how in the military, how, you know, if you're in a place for a certain amount of time, you got to come back home, you know, from deployment. You know, you just can't stay in a space for 2 or 3 years straight, you know, under constant, you know, war mentality or whatnot. That's not good for your psyche. And so
they call it reintegration. When I returned from Afghanistan, the first and the second time, they give you 7 days of reintegration. And you have to go through this training. It's not optional. It's mandatory. 7 days straight, whether you came home on a weekend or whatever, you're going to be in a classroom. They're going to ask you questions. You got to meet with a psychological advisor saying, you know, basically, are you all right to continue? You know, we realize you may have seen some things, done some things, heard some things that may permanently stick in your mind and affect you. So we want to make sure that you are all right. So that African principle of you're unclean and, you know, you can't just return to society, the military has adopted that. And because, you know, I back in the day, before they adopted this practice, there were a lot of killings in families of soldiers coming home. You know, I can remember a guy when I was in the service. This guy killed his whole family, and from the frantic 911 call, he was speaking another language, a language that he had learned, you know, of the people he was fighting. He was speaking another language, and he was just zoned out. So to prevent those type of occurrences from happening, the military adopted this process. So it's just like the African process that you were speaking of. Are you all right, basically, to come back into society and assume your normal role? Because we realize you may have done some things that are not normal for you.
Exactly. I wish they would have adopted this process during the Vietnam War or after the Vietnam War, because there were a lot of families that were destroyed during that time. My father actually, he was a Vietnam. He's a Vietnam veteran. He was over in Vietnam, I want to say 66 and 67. I actually have black and white photos here in my home of my father in Nam. And when he came back, now I was born in 81. He was gone in 66, 67. My brother was born in 1970. But the family told me that when he came back, he was a totally different man. You know, they said he was just exhibiting characteristics that were foreign to his usual, you know, behavior, his usual decorum. And so he didn't have that process of, you know, reintegrating and being reacclimated, you know, back into society. So in turn, my father, we found out a few years ago that he suffers from PTSS. We didn't know that. He saw a lot. And again, because of, you know, because he wasn't, I guess, properly readjusted, you know, into society, he had a lot of issues. And then my mom was explaining to me that a lot of guys who came back from that war also had like a lot of issues. So I wish that the military would have adopted, you know, that process of reintegration, you know, during these wars, because that actually destroyed a lot of families. And mine was one Mine was one of the families that were destroyed. I mean, he brought a lot of habits into his marriage, and in turn that affected, you know, my brother and I, my mom, and our whole family dynamic. And
I mean,
so
there's a whole list of things that can happen, and I'm in the opinion of every person that's been to war gets a little bit of it, even if you didn't get the whole thing. Like survivor's guilt. If some of your comrades died, you like, man, you know, why didn't I die with my troops? You know, I miss my friends, and I feel bad that I'm alive and they're not. You know, guys get into heavy drinking. Try to escape the memories of having to, because you may have to kill kids and anything else over there. They try to escape those memories. To this day, and this is just something personal for me, I don't like people that whistle. And that may sound crazy, but the sounds that mortars make and rockets make when they come in is a whistling sound. And when I hear whistling, I get a little nervous. And that's just something that I just have to deal with. I can remember being back from a deployment, and there was a huge storm in the town. I was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Huge storm in Kentucky. I had just gotten back. And I was over a young lady's house. I was spending the night, and this storm was rocking. I mean, it was loud. And some lightning hit a tree outside of the apartment, and I thought it was a bomb. So I jumped up, started grabbing my, you know, my what I thought was my gear, putting stuff on. I'm looking around the room. Where is my rifle? And when she woke up, she looked at me like, "Are you all right?" And that moment, I looked around the room, and I went, "I came home 3 days ago. I'm tripping." So I can understand.
My mind's playing tricks on me. Ghetto
My
boy.
mind's playing tricks on me. You know, and that's just a little taste of the thing that I went through. So I can only imagine people that go through the whole living, reenacting, you know, killings and blowing up, body parts flying everywhere. You do need to go through something. And we're going to need to set that up as African people for our people, our defense entities that may have to do things they've never done before. Maybe because you don't know when this thing is going to trigger. I had a friend that, you know, he had been out of combat for 5 years. And all of a sudden, one day, it turned on. He was washing some clothes and the suds overflowed, and according to him, the suds turned red like blood. And he started to have a seizure. So you don't know when this thing is going to turn on and turn off. There's no indicators. So, you know, we would definitely have to set that up for our warriors that go out and do things that, you know, are unnatural, or stuff they just might not want to do. Some people never have a problem. Others, they could go through some challenges. So it's real.
It's unnatural. And even, you know, I use the war as an extreme example, but on some level, just fighting white supremacy every day on the job, or trying to fight for, you know, education and building stuff, it takes a toll on your psyche. And a similar or the same types of strategies need to be, you know, implemented, even, you know what I'm saying, for those who do that type of work, you know, because it's very taxing. Like, I know a lot of, just on the university level, you know, a lot of my colleagues who teach at the universities, you know, who are going to literally through battles, you know, over curriculum and the survival of the departments. And you're talking about the HBCUs and stuff like this. And so they're in what Dr. Poe would call is it a resistance zone? No, it's not. It's basically you're behind enemy lines. And especially, I mean, regardless of what university you are, unless it's really started by Black people, but you know, especially when you're not in the HBCU type standing. Now, most HBCUs don't even have an African American studies program. So, you know, that's a different discussion in of itself. But for these who are trying to bring ideas and curriculums like this to the forefront of the African American studies or African studies in these universities, have to go through a lot, you know, in terms of fighting with them. Then you have people who fight on behalf of the law, like for, you know, those who have been wrongly convicted, trying to get political prisoners out, you know, and things of this nature. People who are trying to, you know, find housing, you know, for our single mothers and or, you know, just homeless folks, you know, homeless Black folks. Like, these are all stressing and taxing issues that we all need to, you know, think about. And how do we psychologically heal those who are involved, who don't get those breaks, you know, or who are going to battle in different other kinds of ways? It's just something to think about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we need to go ahead and close this show out. It's been a wonderful show. We got into a lot of the works of our great ancestor, Amos Wilson. I put a list of the books in the chat earlier. So if anybody's interested, please scroll up and look at the titles. I suggest you start with this book, The Falsification of African Consciousness. I think it's not too big. You can see it's not too big. It's 134 pages. That's not bad. Trust me. There are others of his work that will take a little longer to read. So I knocked this out in about a week. So you can definitely pick that up, and it will give you a good grasp of his method and what he's trying to teach. And I believe actually there's a couple of other books with this similar front title that are also not as long that you can get into as well. But if you want to step up to the big boy right away, the Blueprint for Black Power, I believe is 912 pages, I believe. So, I mean, by all means, if you want to step up, go ahead and go for the big boy. But please get some of our great ancestor, Amos Wilson, in your libraries, because you know, his work is irreplaceable. And as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said, he had one of the greatest minds of his generation. And you know, that's a great recommendation coming from how great she was. So I'll end with this quote from Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and Steve Coakley. Until you understand white supremacy, everything else will confuse you. He will help you understand white supremacy. Absolutely. So anything from our panel before we close out?
I have nothing more. I just wanted to say that I think that this was a great show. You know, just venerating this ancestor. He was a wonderful mind. I can watch Dr. Amos Wilson for hours. Like, you know, I on YouTube, there's a page called Donnie. I think it's called Donnie Mossberg on that YouTube page, and he has like over 20 or 30 lectures. And I want to say his page is called Donnie Mossberg. But that brother uploads a lot of Dr. Amos Wilson's lectures. I mean, he has lectures by Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark on his YouTube page. But I initially started, you know, pulling a lot of videos of Amos Wilson, Dr. Amos Wilson, from his YouTube page. Please check him out if you have time, family. Again, I can watch Dr. Amos Wilson for hours. I think that his lectures are very informative, but they're also funny. Like, he had a great sense of humor. He did. You know, while I was watching his lectures, sometimes he would have me chuckling. Sometimes he had me just thinking, you know, profoundly, or, just sometimes he gave me that eureka moment, that aha, okay, so that's why, so you go through a lot of emotions while you're watching Dr. Amos Wilson, but it's definitely worth it. I also recommend getting all of his works, and as as Brother Ben stated earlier, some of his works are very thin, like Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. That's a very thin book. The book on, what was the title, Doctor? What was the title, Brother Ben? On Black on Black violence.
Black on Black violence one.
That was a thin book. He has another
Black violence, the psychodynamics of Black self-annihilation in the service of white domination.
Yep, that's a thin book. And then he also has a book on Garveyism. And I know that's a smaller book. So before you tackle the big dog, the Blueprint for Black Power, get some of his other, Ben, I see you. Get some of his other works.
That book is a weapon. You can hit somebody with that book, they'll be out cold.
Yes, it is. But great show, Brother Ben, and I'm looking forward, to the next show. Great,
yeah,
appreciate
great bill.
Appreciate it, Brother Asar.
I have nothing else to say other than buy Dr. Amos Wilson's books, read it, reread it, take notes, and more importantly, put Amos Wilson's thoughts and ideas to the test. It's not enough to simply read his works and understand it and appreciate it, which is good, but put it to the test. See if it works. For example, in Blueprint for Black Power, he talks about putting together like a collective, a co-op. Start a small co-op in your area, or start a small investment club and things of that nature. Just do the little things and see if it works. And then, expand upon what you have built. So I encourage everyone to put Dr. Amos Wilson's work to the test, and you'll find that you can be successful. And of course, this stuff was written originally, in 95, but it was published in 98. It was finished by his students. And so, some numbers and statistics, may be a little off and need to be updated, but for the most part, everything is right on point and exact and can be utilized today. And so just find the ways, because now we have more opportunities in terms of the technology, in terms of STEM, to be able to do some things and connect with our brothers and sisters to create economies across the waters. And so, that's where, even doubling up on some Amos Wilson with some, make it a stew, a gumbo. So some Amos Wilson mixed with a little Powernomics, Dr. Claude Anderson.
Yeah.
And as I said, this individual, I'm pretty sure once you get to know Ezra Aharon, you'll be very well pleased with the kinds of ideas that he has put forth in terms of sovereignty and regaining hegemony along the same lines. I had to actually introduce him to Dr. Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power. I was surprised. But he wrote an excellent work, independent of it, and some of the same ideas, but expanding more in certain areas than Amos Wilson. So, put that hodgepodge together of those three, and build something. So, see what you can build as a group. See if you can start something as a family, your immediate family.
Excellent.
And just to test the waters, and then, if you have some successes there, depend, see, what your plans are for the future, or if you want to expand this, or another idea, saying outside of the family, do it. So, we don't have to do the big things first and be overwhelmed by that. Let's do some small things, have these small successes so you can build your confidence, and then expand and do some of the larger, more serious works that Amos Wilson and, the Sheikh Antijopes and Claude Andersons and others, are expressing in their text. So those are my closing words. And I thank everyone for listening. Thank you for having me, on the show, Brother Panther, and, for being, glad to share the same space, as Sister Dr. Oya Maat and Brother DJ, who had to leave us a little earlier. So give thanks to all of you, and of course the Agun and my spirit warriors, you know, for giving me and opening the doors to do what I came here to do. And so
Right.
I said sure.
appreciate it.
I said sure. All right. We'll holler at y'all next Saturday. Tune in for another topic. Mossi Warrior Clan out. Spears is flying. A baby for Houdier.